Story 1. My life was forever changed by one night I was driving home from a friend's house. The house was on the outskirts of the city, and as far as my eyes could see, there were only vast cornfields on both sides of the road. My house was still 40 minutes away, and I could hear the angry rumble of my stomach, but there was no sign of a house or people in sight. I decided to take a left turn for a shortcut, hoping to get home sooner. The scenery changed after this turn. The cornfields were now replaced by deep woods, and the hooting owls and howling coyotes reminded me that I was too far from home in the middle of the night. I didn't want to stop, no matter how hungry I felt, so I kept driving for a few kilometers straight. But then I saw a McDonald's drive-through and knew I had to stop. I drove straight into the queue passage, which had no other cars, and stopped right next to the window. A skinny teenage boy was dozing off while sitting on the counter. I honked my horn twice, and he woke up with an awkward expression on his face. I'm sorry, sir. I was just..." he started. "Relax, man. No problem. I get it. It's okay to be tired," I replied with a smile. He smiled back and asked for my order. "I'll have a Big Mac with 1 small fries and an iced tea." "Okay, give me some time to get back with your food," he said, before heading inside the restaurant to prepare the meal. I figured this outlet was short-staffed, and the boy was in charge of everything that night. I sat quietly, waiting for my meal. But then the urge to pee hit me suddenly. I got out of the car and went to use the public toilet located in the corner of the drive-thru. I was about to close the door when I noticed a guy dressed as Ronald McDonald sitting on a bench a short distance away. He had a sad face and was staring at the ground like he was about to cry. Suddenly, he looked up and our eyes met. A weird smile appeared on his face. His teeth were broken in places, making his smile even more disturbing. His eyes were large yet drowsy, and he had a hypnotic stare that made me very uncomfortable. His face was so bony that his cheekbones seemed to jut out from under his skin. I felt frozen in place as he watched me for a few seconds, then stood up, retaining that same creepy smile, and started jogging in place. "What a creep," I muttered, closing the toilet door on his face. As I was doing my business, I heard a muffled sobbing sound. The sound wasn't loud, but it was unsettling enough. Is that guy crying? What the hell is wrong with him? I wondered. Suddenly, the sound stopped, and silence took over. I turned towards the door, wondering what I would see when I opened it. Just then, a loud bang made my heart skip a beat, followed by a familiar voice. "Sir? Sir, are you in there?" I opened the door and saw that it was the skinny teenager standing outside with a big packet in his hand. "Your food is ready. I called out to you, but..." "Yeah, I had to take a leak," I stammered. He handed me the food, and we both walked back to my car. As I was taking out cash from my wallet to pay him, I noticed the bench where that Ronald guy had been sitting just a few minutes earlier. It was empty, and the guy was nowhere to be found. Seeing me looking at the bench, the boy asked, "Is anything wrong, sir?" "Nothing like that. It's just, your Ronald McDonald guy's pretty creepy. He would scare the kids away." "What Ronald McDonald guy?" "The man who was sitting here a few moments ago, wearing your mascot costume." "I have no idea what you're talking about, sir. We don't have anyone like that here. It's just me at this place." A cold shiver ran down my spine as he said that. I paid him quickly and got back on the road without wasting any more time. The confused boy watched me drive away in a hurry. I rolled down the windows to get some fresh air, trying to shake off the creepy encounter. Some crazy guy freaked me out, and I'm acting all childish about it, I thought, feeling embarrassed by my cowardly behavior. The boy was probably laughing at me now, seeing a guy twice his age get scared by some stupid mascot. I wanted to turn on some music to distract myself, but before I could press the button on my music player, I heard a squeaky laugh coming from the back seat. My heartbeat quickened, and drops of sweat appeared on my forehead as I slowly looked in the rearview mirror. A dark, shadowy figure was sitting in my back seat. It was a man with a curly red wig on his head. He slowly emerged from the darkness, and the passing streetlights illuminated his face. Those same wide, drowsy eyes and the red-painted, sinister smile were staring back at me. I was so terrified that I forgot to scream. A cold, sharp, metallic object touched my neck as the creepy Ronald leaned close to me. "You shouldn't have closed the door on me, mate," he whispered. "What do you want?" I stammered. "I want to show you how sharp this knife is. Hand me your iced tea. Come on, do it." Okay, I said, handing him my cup of iced tea. The situation was tense. I couldn't speed up, fearing he would slit my throat, and no one would ever find my body. I decided to handle the situation carefully, not wanting to do anything reckless to set this psycho off. He placed the cup on my shoulder and then moved the knife swiftly. The knife was so sharp that it sliced through the bottom of the cup like butter, and the cold tea spilled all over my clothes. "Oh my God," I muttered. He laughed heartily while I was on the verge of panicking. In a trembling voice, I said, "Look, mister, call me Ronald." Yes, Ronald. "I'm sorry for disrespecting you earlier. Please forgive me." "That's a good start. Now just tell me where to drop you off, and I will. No issues." "Are you trying to get rid of me?" No. I'll drive quietly. You can tell me where to stop." Good boy. I kept driving, and Ronald watched me with that crazed smile the entire time. When we neared a right turn, Ronald suddenly screamed, "That's it. Stop right there, and then we'll both get out of the car. It'll be a night full of so much fun." I slowed the car down near the turn. I knew deep in my heart that if I got out of the car with this psycho, I'd probably never make it home. I had to think of a way to escape. "Are you going to stop, or should I make you?" Ronald yelled. No, I'll stop," I replied, slowing the car, but not turning off the engine. He opened the back door, and as soon as he stepped out, I put the car in gear, ready to speed away. But in my panic, I accidentally put the car in reverse instead of first gear. I pressed the accelerator hard, and the car shot backward, crashing into Ronald, who was standing there. Not expecting this sudden turn of events, he fell to the ground, and I couldn't stop myself from running over him again. The left tire crushed his leg, breaking all the bones in his limb. I could hear the sickening crunch and his agonized scream simultaneously. "Eat dirt, you freak!" I shouted at him, and drove away without hesitation. But this guy was so twisted that even after losing his entire leg, he still got up and, in a very disturbing way, tried to chase my car, hobbling on his one good leg. His smile grew even wider as he chased after me. Before my car sped away from his sight, I heard his voice echoing in the night, screaming, "I'm Ronald McDonald. No one gets away from me." I can't explain how I made it home that night, but after that day, I stopped going to McDonald's forever. Story 2. It all started when I was 10 years old. My family had just moved into a new house, a large, old Victorian-style place that creaked with every step you took. The house had been empty for years, but my parents fell in love with its charm and potential. So we moved in despite the eerie atmosphere that lingered in every room. One afternoon, as I was exploring the attic, I stumbled upon an old, dusty trunk tucked away in a corner. The trunk was locked, but the key was hanging right next to it, almost as if it had been left there for someone to find. Curiosity got the better of me, so I unlocked the trunk and opened it. Inside was a collection of old, musty-smelling clothes, a few yellowed letters, and nestled at the bottom, a porcelain doll. The doll was about the size of a small child, dressed in a tattered lace dress with faded blue ribbons. But what caught my attention the most was the doll's face. It had bright blue eyes that seemed too real, and a wide, eerie smile painted across its porcelain face. The smile was unnatural, too wide for the doll's delicate features, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I don't know why, but I decided to take the doll downstairs and show it to my mom. She was in the kitchen, unpacking boxes, and when she saw the doll, she froze. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "In the attic," I replied, confused by her reaction. She took a deep breath and forced a smile. "It's just an old doll, sweetie. Why don't you put it back where you found it?" But I didn't want to. Despite the doll's unsettling appearance, I felt drawn to it. I decided to keep it in my room, placing it on a shelf where it could watch over me as I slept. That night, I had the first of many nightmares. I dreamed that the doll was standing at the foot of my bed. Its wide smile stretched even further, almost splitting its porcelain face in half. It whispered my name in a voice that was both sweet and sinister, sending chills down my spine. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The next morning, I noticed something strange. The doll was no longer on the shelf where I had placed it. Instead, it was sitting on my bedside table, facing me, its smile as wide as ever. I felt a jolt of fear, but brushed it off, thinking I must have moved it in my sleep without realizing it. But the next night, the nightmare returned. The doll was closer this time, standing right next to my bed, its cold porcelain hand resting on my arm. I could feel the chill of its touch, even in my dream. It whispered my name again, this time with more urgency, telling me to play with it, to be its friend. I woke up screaming, and my parents rushed into my room to comfort me. After that night, strange things started happening around the house. Objects would move on their own. Doors would creak open and shut without any wind, and the temperature in my room would drop drastically. Even in the middle of summer, my parents tried to reassure me that it was just an old house settling. But I knew better. I knew it had something to do with the doll. I tried to get rid of it, throwing it into the trash bin outside. But the next morning, it was back on my shelf, smiling at me as if nothing had happened. I even tried to bury it in the backyard. But the following day, it reappeared in my room, dirt clinging to its lace dress. Desperate, I confided in my best friend, Sarah, who had always been into spooky things. She suggested we do some research on the house and the doll. We spent hours at the local library, digging through old newspapers and records. What we found sent chills down my spine. The house had once belonged to a woman named Margaret Hawkins, who had lived there with her daughter, Annabelle. Annabelle had died tragically at a young age, and Margaret, overcome with grief, had a porcelain doll made in her likeness. She treated the doll as if it were her daughter, even after her death. Neighbors reported hearing Margaret talking to the doll, playing with it, and even feeding it. The strange behavior continued until one day Margaret was found dead in the attic, clutching the doll in her arms, her face twisted into a wide, unnatural smile. Sarah and I were horrified. We realized that the doll I had found was Annabelle's doll, the same one that Margaret had cherished until her death. That night, I had the worst nightmare yet. The doll was standing right next to my bed. But this time, it wasn't just whispering my name. It was screaming it, over and over, its smile widening until it looked like the doll's face would crack open. Its porcelain hands reached for me, and I felt a cold, suffocating pressure around my neck as if it were trying to choke me. I woke up gasping for air, and to my horror, I found the doll sitting on my chest, its cold hands pressed against my throat. I screamed and threw it across the room, where it shattered against the wall, pieces of porcelain scattering everywhere. But the nightmare didn't end there. The shattered pieces of the doll began to move on their own, slowly coming back together, piece by piece. The doll's smile was the last thing to form, and when it did, it was wider and more sinister than ever. I knew I had to get rid of the doll for good. So the next morning, I told my parents everything. They were skeptical at first, but agreed to help me. We took the doll's remains, wrapped them in a thick blanket, and drove to the outskirts of town, where we buried it in an old, abandoned cemetery. For a while, things seemed to return to normal. The strange occurrences stopped, and I no longer had nightmares, but deep down, I knew that the doll wasn't gone for good. A few months later, we decided to move out of the house. On the day we were packing up to leave, I went up to the attic one last time. As I was about to close the door, something caught my eye. There, in the corner where I had found the trunk, was a small, dusty object. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. But curiosity got the better of me. I walked over and picked it up. It was a single porcelain hand, small and delicate, with fingers frozen in a grasping motion. I dropped it in horror and ran out of the attic, slamming the door behind me. We moved out that same day, and I never looked back. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear a faint whisper, calling my name, and I know that the doll is still out there, waiting for someone new to find it. And when they do, I hope they're ready for the nightmare that follows.